I want to welcome all of you to the Human Rights Violations Conference. Today we'll be addressing the rise of global genocidal anti-Semitism and Vatican II's Nostra Aetate. First, I want to thank our sponsors for their outstanding leadership in hosting this historic event. His Excellency, Dr. Caleb Otto, Ambassador from Palau, His Excellency, Mr. Nicholas Emilou, Ambassador from Cyprus, and His Excellency, Mr. Ron Prosser, Ambassador from Israel. I also want to thank Pave the Way Foundation and Americans for a Safe Israel for co-sponsoring this program. I would also like to thank all of the ambassadors, delegates, and distinguished guests and UN staffers who have taken the time out of their busy schedule to join us for this important program. I'd also like to thank our distinguished panelists who were willing to participate on our panel today. I also want to thank our guests, many who have traveled a great distance to participate in our program. Finally, I want to thank Ambassador Otto's staff and our dedicated volunteers, to which this program would not be possible. My name is Lori Cardoza Moore. I serve as a deacon and ECOSOC NGO Special Envoy to the UN for the World Council of Independent Christian Churches. In my capacity as Special Envoy for the WCICC, my responsibilities include human rights issues in the Middle East, including defending the rights of Jewish, Christian, and Muslim women and children. The WCICC has over 44 million congregants around the world under the leadership of Archbishop Dr. John Lipoli. Unfortunately, Dr. Lipoli was unable to join us today due to an illness, but he sends his regards to all of our guests. I also serve as president of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations. PJTN is a nonprofit Christian organization whose mission is to educate Christians around the world about their biblical responsibility to stand with and support our Jewish brethren against the rise of global genocidal anti-Semitism. Thank you. We accomplish our mission by producing award-winning documentaries and programs to educate Christians and mobilize them to action around the globe. For the past 6 years, we've been delivering that message through our documentary films and related media, reaching over 900 million homes in over 200 countries. Currently, we have people from 167 countries who visit our website and order our films and programs. We've heard from people in New Zealand, South Africa, Sweden, Croatia, India, Germany, Ireland, and the UK, just to name a few. Our focus and our goal today is to reach Christians around the world and provide UN ambassadors with the incentive and the tools to confront this issue in their respective countries. Today, I'll serve in the capacity of moderator for this program. We will begin with opening remarks from our distinguished panelists. Ambassador Dr. Caleb Otto is Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Palau to the United Nations. Please give a warm welcome to Ambassador Otto.
Thank you all very much for coming. I would like to acknowledge the presence of my Pacific Island ambassadors and colleagues, His Excellency Ambassador Faturi of Samoa, and Her Excellency Ambassador Jane of Micronesia. And I see His Excellency Ambassador Canada. On behalf of the co-sponsors and co-organizers of this meeting, the missions of Cyprus and Israel, and the World Council of Independent Christian Churches, and Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, welcome to this lunch hour session on the human rights dimension, addressing the rise of global anti-Semitism in the Vatican II Nostra Aetate. Throughout the world, in so many places, there are conflicts and immeasurable amount of human suffering and devastations of individual lives, of children, adults, and families alike. Peace is sought after in so many fronts and yet continues to elude us due to our own unwillingness to stand up and say no to intolerance in all its forms. We all need to be stronger in this respect. Someone said, "The tolerant must tolerate the intolerant no longer." At the end of World War II and the beginning of the United Nations, the world vowed never again to seek extermination of the Jewish people, and by extension, any race. As the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon says, this organization was born out of the ashes of World War II to, according to its charter, reaffirm faith in the fundamental rights, in the dignity and worth of human person, to practice tolerance and live together in peace with one another, and in promoting and encouraging respect for human rights and for fundamental freedoms for all without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion, and to be a center for harmonizing the actions of nations in the attainment of the common ends of peace and security. Thus, it appears that the organization has strayed from its mission when out of the 70 to 100 resolutions it passes each year, between 15 to 20 of them are directed against one particular nation. In other words, 1/5 to 1/4 of all resolutions are directed negatively against Israel. Another way to look at it is to say that of all the resolutions passed to criticize a nation, 3/4 of them apply to Israel. One has to ask the question then, why that is. I am aware of the Israel-Palestine conflict, and I pray that someday very soon a peaceful solution can be achieved for the Israelis and Palestinians. There are many other examples of conflicts between nations and between peoples, but no one nation is condemned by the UN resolutions in the manner that Israel is. It seems to me then that the reason for condemnation is not so much the act of aggression or instigation of conflict or even who does it. It seems that the state of Israel is guilty because of its citizens who are Jewish people. In all appearance, this is anti-Semitic. Never again was the vow made only 70 years ago about the Holocaust. But now we are seeing a resurgence of the same reasons for mistreating the Jewish people. These reasons now give rise for advocating to boycott Jewish businesses and products, to boycott Jewish arts and entertainment. The main reason is that they belong to Jewish people. We know from history that this reasoning resulted in the killing of 6 million Jewish people. This kind of attitude has no place anywhere in the world today, least of all within the walls of the United Nations, where we are supposed to be the premier peacemakers. Just last Sunday night, we adopted an agenda for transforming our world. In its declaration, we said, we are determined to foster peaceful, just, and inclusive societies which are free from fear and violence. Fear and violence. How many Jewish people live in fear and violence and are subjected to violence in various parts of the world today? Only because they are of Jewish race. Also, how many Muslims live in fear and subjected to violence because of their faith? In preparation for the Nostra Aetate, second, Pope Francis reminds us that Christians should avoid hateful generalizations about Muslims, because as he explains, authentic Islam and the proper reading of the Quran are opposed to every form of violence. And Prince Turki Al Faisal, former Director General of Saudi Arabia's General Intelligence Directorate, in an article called Fahish, Not ISIS, in the spring issues of Horizons, a journal of international relations and sustainable development, he says, Islam is an extraordinarily rich religion and historical tradition and a way of life for billions of ordinary people. In practice, it translates into a religious life centered on devotion to God, respectful behavior to others, a peaceful, well-run society, and an emphasis on self-improvement. So as we celebrate the 70th anniversary of the United Nations, we can turn fresh pages of our attitude and behavior and embrace all peoples of all races as equal and deserving dignity and respect. I know this means a lot to everyone, as it has to me. Because of the color of my skin, I have been discriminated against many times. I have also experienced great satisfaction at times when people who would not even talk to me at first become great friends to me once we get to know each other. This happened to me right here at the United Nations. During my first week here, a person sat next to me through the whole lunch hour without even acknowledging my presence. This person is one of my closest friends now. As Christians, we are called to be peacemakers. For me, this does not mean that I can only be a friend of a Jewish person at the expense of a non-Jewish person or vice versa. I am here at the United Nations to be the bridge of goodwill, partnership, and blessings to the people of Palau. I work hard to make friends and peace with all the members of the United Nations. And in seeking God's blessings for Palau, I will bless Israel, because God said in Genesis 12:3, in speaking to Abraham, saying, "And I will bless you, and I will bless those who bless you." For me, one does not need to hate or curse a person in order to bless another. It is, in fact, best to bless everyone. And for me, that's what the United Nations is all about. So let me close with the words of Prince Turki Al Faisal again. Peace is not the absence of violence, but rather the active cultivation of social unity. I thank you.
Ms. Nellie Shiloh, Head of Human Rights Division, on behalf of the Permanent Mission of Israel to the United Nations. Nellie, the floor is yours. Thank you.
As a representative of the State of Israel, as a young girl growing up in Syria, I witnessed anti-Semitism and experienced it firsthand. My father risked his life and the lives of his wife and children when he decided to escape from Syria and come to Israel. Without the brave actions of my father, I would not be standing here in front of you today. At that time, the Jews of Syria believed that the only safe place in the world for Jews was in Israel. I believe, thanks to the education and values I got in Israel, that the world must be safe for people of all religions, Jews, Muslims, and Christians all over the world. Before I continue, I would like to say thank you to all the ambassadors, diplomats, and guests who are here with us today. Thank you as well to all the organizations and missions who sponsor this important forum, and to all those who work to convene this important event. The topic we are here to discuss today is the rise of global genocidal anti-Semitism. This is not an academic discussion of dark times from our history. Unfortunately, the issue we confront here today is as acute and relevant as ever. When the chant, "Death to Jews," can be heard on the streets of Paris, when synagogues in Europe must be protected by armed guards, when vile anti-Semitic images can be found in the Palestinian press and in newspapers throughout the Arab world, we must stand up and pay attention. These signs of renewed hatred of Jews, just because they are Jews, must serve as a wake-up call for the international community and for the United Nations. Anti-Semitism is not a relic from the past, but an ever-present reality for Jews in many places. We must take action now to eradicate the plague of Jew hatred from our future. We must come to grips with the reality that within living memory of the Holocaust, the Jews of Europe fear to wear a kippah in public and think twice before identifying themselves as Jews. Anti-Semitic graffiti is now a common sight, and Jews around the world face daily insults on the streets. We know all too well, as history tells us over and over, that what starts with hateful and degrading taunts ends with violence and murder. In Brussels, a man with a Kalashnikov opened fire and killed 4 people at the Jewish Museum of Belgium. In Paris, in the day of horrific bloodshed we all remember vividly, innocent Jews were murdered in a kosher grocery store as they prepared for the Sabbath. For the first time since the Second World War, Synagogue de la Victoire, the Grand Synagogue of Paris, could not hold Sabbath prayer services. In Toulouse, France, a gunman murdered a rabbi and 3 young children in front of Jewish school. In Copenhagen, at the Great Synagogue, a volunteer guard from the Jewish community gave his life to prevent a terrorist from breaching the synagogue where the community was celebrating a bat mitzvah. Schools, groceries, places of worship, educational centers, in the very places where people come together as a community, a basic sense of security has been shaken. Brave leaders in these countries have spoken out, and we applaud their solidarity with Jews as fellow countrymen, but much more needs to be done. Ladies and gentlemen, we must not make the mistake of thinking that anti-Semitism exists because of what Jews do, what Jews say, or what Jews believe. As Jonathan Sachs, the former chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, explained, Jews have been hated because they were rich, and because they were poor, because they were capitalist, and because they were communists, because they believed in tradition, and because they were ruthless cosmopolitans, because they kept to themselves, and because they penetrated everywhere. Anti-Semitism, Rabbi Sachs concluded, is not a belief, but is a virus. A virus cannot be argued with. It must be eradicated. This is why we must never excuse or rationalize anti-Semitism. Targeting Jewish businesses, places of worship, and Jews themselves is no less anti-Semitic when it is done out of perceived wrongs committed by Israel. Singling out Jews, and only Jews, as powerful, tribal, disloyal, and devious should be seen for what it is, a restatement of classical anti-Semitism. And we must state frankly, delegitimization of Israel, the one and only Jewish state, may be nothing more than a pretext for prejudice. It can be a way for those who hate Jews to express their hatred without suffering the shame of being publicly identified as anti-Semite. We must be careful. Not all criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism. Looking for prejudice where it does not exist only strengthens those who seek to use claims of anti-Semitism as a weapon against supporters of Israel. However, when Israel is condemned as an illegitimate state, when the Jewish state is denounced as racist for being Jewish, when the only democracy in the Middle East faces accusations not leveled at the world's worst dictators, a clear line has been crossed. Such outrageous slander of Israel has little to do with Israel's actions and a lot to do with the fateful prejudice of those who make them. As Bernard-Henri Lévy said, even if Israel were a nation of angels, even then, alas, this old, enigmatic hatred would not dissipate one iota. For such people, the real objection is the fact that the Jewish people have returned to their ancient homeland, and the true crime is that the Jews, as all other people, now have a thriving state of our own. I don't intend to draw a clear line in the sand where legitimate criticism ends and where anti-Semitism begins. Rather, to paraphrase Justice Potter Stewart, I know anti-Semitism when I see it. I know it when, in the halls of the United Nations, some delegations compare Israeli actions to those of Nazi Germany. As the European Parliament Working Group on Anti-Semitism has recognized, such comparisons are not simply disgraceful, they are manifestations of anti-Semitism. Ladies and gentlemen, this past January, for the first time ever, the UN General Assembly met to discuss the age-old problem of anti-Semitism. This important step for the world was made possible by our determined effort and by the steadfast support of our partners. In a joint statement, nations declared with one voice that the United Nations must step forward and play a pivotal role in combating anti-Semitism as well as intolerance, discrimination, and violence based on religion or belief. Yet, the work we began in the historic gathering is still unfinished. Despite the urgency of the threat we are here today to discuss, there is still no UN resolution condemning anti-Semitism and calling on UN member states to fight against it. We called for the creation of a UN seminar to educate about the hateful causes and the heinous consequences of anti-Semitism. This call has not yet been answered and should not be ignored. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to finish. The lessons of the Holocaust were a guideline light for the founders of the United Nations, yet anti-Semitism still thrives today, sometimes even crossing the threshold of this institution. So let's join together to declare that we will not give up, we will not be silent, we will not ignore the minor anti-Semitic incidents, nor will we ignore grave cases. We will not allow world leaders to look away from anti-Semitism in their midst. We will speak up. We will educate. We will not look away from the suffering of others. And at the end, we will win. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Ms. Shiloh. Now I would like to turn your attention to Monica Pachumi. She is Third Committee Human Rights and Humanitarian Affairs on behalf of the Permanent Mission of Cyprus to the United Nations. Madam, you have the floor.
Dear organizers, on behalf of the Mission of Cyprus to the United Nations, I would like to congratulate you on today's event. We express our concern about the disturbing rise of anti-Semitic hatred and violence internationally. The world has suffered too much from war and genocide, and we in Cyprus know too well the consequences of war. Cyprus has historic relations with Israel and its people dating back to the Hellenistic period. Cypriots have also witnessed the difficulties faced by the survivors of the Holocaust when, following the end of the Second World War, stayed for around 9 months in Cyprus, which was then a British colony. During that period, Cypriots offered the Jewish refugees their assistance, while friendly relations developed. Today, Cyprus is committed to fighting anti-Semitism at the international and national levels through its policies, positions, and legislation on combating racism and xenophobia and religious intolerance, and our position is guided by the European Union's positions on the issue. We are also resolved to never again let atrocities such as the Holocaust happen, and we observe the International Day of the commemoration in memory of the victims of the Holocaust. The rise of anti-Semitism and of other forms of racism and xenophobia can also be combated through dialogue, education, and awareness raising. In this framework, we welcome the UN General Assembly debate to address the concerns of a rise in anti-Semitic violence worldwide in January, and the Berlin Conference to commemorate the 10th anniversary of the OSCE's Declaration on Anti-Semitism and the declaration adopted on that occasion. The contribution of religious leaders is also of significant importance. Nostra, Aetate, the historic text of the Catholic Church adopted in 1965, is one such testimony to how religion can play an important role in religious tolerance and respect. The role of religious leaders was also highlighted during the General Assembly high-level thematic debate on promoting tolerance and reconciliation in April. We welcome and support the call of the UN Secretary General for the engagement of faith leaders in countering violent extremism and the support expressed by religious leaders during the thematic debate on the importance of interfaith dialogue. The role of religious leaders is recognized in the European Union Action Plan on Human Rights and Democracy for the period 2015 to 2019, which contains among its actions the promotion of intercultural and interreligious dialogue and the role of religious and other leaders in ensuring freedom of religion or belief. Ladies and gentlemen, in the effort to combat anti-Semitism and any other form of racism, xenophobia, or related intolerance, no effort can be spared. Governments, the international community, and religious leaders, we all must stand united. Thank you.
Before we go on, I want to recognize representatives from the other distinguished missions, including Italy, Germany, the Holy See, Canada, Finland, France, and Spain. Thank you so much for being here today. And Panama, I'm sorry. I'd like to bring you a statement from Archbishop Dr. John Lapoli with the World Council of Independent Christian Churches. Greetings on behalf of the members and leaders of the World Council of Independent Christian Churches. As you may know, the WCICC is found in 83 nations around the world. We represent 380,000 churches and ministries. Our congregation number in the millions. The reason I bring these numbers to your attention is to let you know the problem of global genocidal anti-Semitism is not just a problem here in the USA, it is worldwide. My apologies to all of you for my absence due to an injury I received not long ago. Hatred in any form is wrong and needs to be reversed and corrected. Hatred based on race, color, or creed must be stopped at all levels. Israel and the Jewish people received this hatred, all three, in anti-Semitism. The church in general is not exempt from this criticism, as anti-Semitism lives well within the doctrines and dogmas of the church. Need I remind you that the people of Israel are God's people, and we all benefit from the Abrahamic covenant. The WCICC calls on all churches to stop the anti-Semitic action at once, be it in doctrine or in practice. I would like to thank the Roman Catholic Church in their efforts to celebrate the work of Pope Paul VI and Vatican II in a declaration that anti-Semitism is wrong, as stated in the document titled Nostra Aetate. Stopping hatred in all its forms is something we can all work on together. Let us use this occasion to make a change today. Greetings, Archbishop John Lapoli. I would like to begin my comments by quoting His Holiness, the late Pope John the 23rd, when he greeted 130 members of the United Jewish Appeal delegation with a biblical reference from Genesis saying, "I am Joseph, your brother." Later, just before his death, he composed a prayer to make atonement for the church's history of anti-Semitism. His powerful words stated, "We realize now that many, many centuries of blindness have dimmed our eyes, so that we no longer see the beauty of thy chosen people and no longer recognize in their faces the features of our firstborn brother. We realize that our brows are branded with the mark of Cain. Centuries long has Abel laid in blood and tears because he had forgotten thy love. Forgive us the curse which we unjustly laid on the name of the Jews. Forgive us that with our curse we crucified thee a second time." During his papacy, Pope John initiated the Catholic Church's historic break from an almost 1,000-year-old tradition and dogma of at times subtle but often overt anti-Semitism. In 1961, under Pope John, the Catholic Church drafted a document titled Nostra Aetate, which is Latin for "in our time." It historically declared a new relation of the church with non-Christian religions. In part, it speaks of the bond between Christians and Jews and states that blame for Jesus' death cannot be laid upon the Jews. The declaration also decries all displays and acts of anti-Semitism. With its passage in 1965, Nostra Aetate signaled a new starting point in the Church's relations with Judaism. Few Christians and Jews know the remarkable declaration of Nostra Aetate. In one history-making document, the Catholic Church not only acknowledged that the Jews were not responsible for the death of Jesus and eliminated the espousing of the deicide narrative, it also recognized that the Jewish covenant with God for the land of Israel had not been broken, and it further stated that Christianity sprang from Jewish roots. Upon the drafting of Nostra Aetate in 1965, Pope Paul VI stated, "The Jews should not be presented as rejected or accursed by God, as if this followed the Holy Scriptures." I wonder how many people in this room know about this very momentous declaration. I pray that this forum will go far to educate member states about this groundbreaking theological shift. Earlier this year, a PJTN delegation traveled to the Vatican to meet with His Eminence Cardinal Kurt Koch, President of the Pontifical Council for Christian Unity, to discuss a global celebration of the upcoming 50th anniversary of Nostra Aetate. The principles and points of this historic and unprecedented declaration should not only be celebrated, but also declared throughout the Christian world. We further respectfully requested that the Holy See, in his position of authority over the Catholic Church, be the light to all nations and people of conscience by publicly reminding Christians around the world of the Church's rejection of the protocols of the Elders of Zion. This publication continues to be distributed around the globe to incite anti-Semitic attacks against Jews worldwide. The incomprehensible resurgence of global genocidal anti-Semitism demands that Christians and all people of conscience reject the protocols and the many libels that have been spawned by it. As in Nazi Germany of the 1930s, evidence continues to mount that the resurgence of global genocidal anti-Semitism today is a direct result of the protocols. In many ways, the protocols gave Hitler a manifesto for eliminating the Jews. As with Stalin and other dictators, the death of Judaism was key to his supposed utopia. His driving ambition was to free the world from the shackles of conscience and morality, to turn the world away from monotheism. The message of the Jews was diametrically opposed to his vision of what the world should be. Furthermore, Hitler knew that the Jewish threat to his ideals was embodied in every single Jew. The Jewish spirit, Hitler explained, is the product of the Jewish person. Destroying their holy places alone would not be enough. Hitler stated, "Conscience is a Jewish invention. It is a blemish like circumcision. Even had there never existed a synagogue or a Jewish school or the Old Testament, the Jewish spirit would still exist and would exert its influence. It has been there from the beginning, and there is no Jew, not a single one, who does not personify it. Providence has ordained that I should be the greatest liberator of humanity. I am freeing man from the restraints of the dirty and degrading self-mortifications of a false vision known as conscience and morality." The evil of Hitler lay not in his understanding of who the Jewish people were. His evil grew from his reaction to that understanding. Ironically, Hitler had a clearer understanding of who the Jewish people are and what they have accomplished. As anti-Semitism grows worldwide, the need to thoroughly repudiate and stop the spread of the protocols and to champion the message of Nostra Aetate is critical, as there is no longer any point in pretending that the horror and intensity of the violence and hatred will soon cease. Nostra Aetate is a vital step in the right direction to stem the age-old hatred. Our Christian faith dictates that we care about our Jewish brethren, and logic and preservation should motivate us to speak out. There are many words for attitudes and actions that are detrimental to human beings. Bias and prejudice deals with attitudes. Bigotry, discrimination, and racism are actions. But when racism becomes genocidal and is directed against Jewish people, that is anti-Semitism. Bottom line, anti-Semitism's ultimate goal is genocide. As the Bible commands, rejecting the intent of the protocols is required, and societies who perpetuate these atrocious libels forfeit their national souls. The sacred declaration of the Church through Nostra Aetate affirms that the faithful have a responsibility, indeed an obligation, to stand with our Jewish brethren against the resurgence of global genocidal anti-Semitism. In 1978, Pope John Paul II proclaimed, "The Church cannot forget that she received the revelation of the Old Testament through the people with whom God, in his inexpressible mercy, concluded the ancient covenant. Nor can she forget that she draws sustenance from the root of that well-cultivated olive tree, unto which have been grafted the wild shoots, the Gentiles. Indeed, the Church believes that by his cross, Christ, our peace, reconciled Jews and Gentiles, making both one in himself." Following his historic visit to the death camps in Poland, he stated, "To this day, Auschwitz does not cease to admonish, reminding us that anti-Semitism is a great sin against humanity, that all racial hatred inevitably leads to the trampling of human dignity. We are deeply saddened by the behavior of those who, in the course of history, have caused these children of yours to suffer, and asking your forgiveness, we wish to commit ourselves to genuine brotherhood with the people of the covenant. You are our dearly beloved brothers, and in a certain way, it could be said that you are our elder brothers." For many people, the acceleration of global anti-Semitism is incomprehensible. Others who believed that such atrocities could never happen again have received a wake-up call. They've come to realize that it's nothing less than global genocidal anti-Semitism, perpetrated by those who despise the very existence of Jewish people and openly seek to annihilate the 14 million surviving Jews. If we consider the rise of Nazism in Germany, a technologically advanced Christian nation, it is not improbable that it could happen again. Before it is too late, we must recognize the characteristics of this age-old hatred and take steps to protect our fellow man. Recently, the UN has also taken a stand against this growing global threat. On April 21st and 22nd, the UN General Assembly conducted a high-level thematic debate promoting tolerance and reconciliation. The subject was fostering peaceful, inclusive societies and countering violent extremism. During the debate, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon commissioned member states of the United Nations with the task of broadening its reach to religious leaders and clergy around the globe to confront violence against religious minorities. He stated, "The UN was born out of the ashes of World War II. After the Holocaust, we pledged never again." During the conference, he challenged faith leaders to address these complex issues by providing leadership and wisdom to confront violent extremism. He also quoted Deuteronomy stating, "Be brave and courageous." One of the religious minority groups repeatedly mentioned during the 2 days was the Jewish community and the rise of anti-Semitism. It isn't often that the UN, the Church, and the Holy Scriptures sit in agreement. As such, Holy Scripture testifies that God holds the Jews most dear for the sake of their fathers. He does not repent of the gifts he makes or of the calls he issues. Such is the witness of the apostle. As Christians, we are reminded by the Apostle Paul in Galatians that if you are in Christ, you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. Paul further stated in his epistle to the Ephesians, "You who were once outside of the commonwealth of Israel have been brought near because of Christ's shed blood." So what does Paul mean? And as Christians and people of conscience, how can we act on Paul's words today? We each have our own area of influence and power, Yes, each and every one of us has the power to do something. The question is, will we use it to stop the hatred? Will we do all in our power to stand up and make a difference? I pray that today you will not only learn how to make a difference, but be inspired to do all you can to stop the heinous sin of global genocidal anti-Semitism. Thank you. We are now going to move to our panel again and open with discussion with Monsignor Guy Massey. Monsignor Massey is the chairperson for the Ecumenical and Interfaith Commission for the Roman Catholic Diocese of Brooklyn. He was ordained on May 21st, 1983, and a major component in his background was his interest in Judaism. Monsignor Massey became involved with the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith and authored the booklet titled Confronting Anti-Semitism. Monsignor Massey, you have the floor.
Thank you. I think I agree with what was just said about Nostra Aetate. We celebrate the 50th anniversary of that document this year in October. And it was because of that document, because of that great turnabout in Catholic thinking in 1965, that I sit here today and that I was able to study at the Jewish Theological Seminary of America and the Hebrew University in Jerusalem to learn and to have my degree in Judaic studies. The document, as you have just heard, not only condemns anti-Semitism, but also recognizes very clearly the roots of Christianity in Judaism, from the patriarchs to the apostles to Christ himself to ourselves, and as a result we share that common religious background. With that in mind, Nostra Aetate also opens up discussion with Judaism and the learning from Judaism our past as we discuss with Judaism who we are. Nostra Aetate also opens up discussion with Islam and approaches Islam from a very interesting perspective as a recognition that God speaks in so many different ways and we find truth in so many different places, including Hinduism and Buddhism. It is a document that opens our understanding of people on all of these religious backgrounds. The reference that was made by Nellie Shiloh as to the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe, this past summer, I would say July, I was in Paris myself, and I was at the metro station, and I was exiting the metro, only to find graffiti on the wall that was clearly anti-Jewish. And I said, my goodness, here we have a document in our time, and now in my time, this is now going on again. The irony, I thought, that in a technological society that we have, with internet, iPhones, and every other way in which we are in communication with each other, I would have thought that mutual understanding would have grown. And yet, I'm not sensing that. I'm sensing more of a division among all of us over issues that seem to be very surprising. Religious issues, economic issues, racial issues, national origin issues. We also see, to my great surprise, the religious fundamentalists in certain areas killing people because of what they believe. And I'm referring to the killing of so many Christians of every denomination in parts of the Middle East and elsewhere. This is more than a religious issue. This, I think, is an issue of people not being able to perhaps see beyond their own areas. How do we speak not only to the people who are for us, but to religious fundamentalism? that seems to want to convert to their particular way of thinking about things that are transcendent and thinking that they have the whole truth, that all of us have to follow a particular way. This is a very dangerous time. And so when we look at documents such as Nostra, Aetate, which opens up this dialogue, it also opens up and it's based on what we believe, the dignity of humanity. Because the dignity of humanity represents God. God is present in humanity from my perspective and from the perspective of much Christian theology, because of our belief that God becomes human in the person of Christ. Therefore, when we see people who are persecuted, as that document says, persecution of any person from any place is wrong for religious reasons, gender reasons, or national origin reasons. How do we translate the ability of each of these religious traditions, whatever they are, to translate into the dignity of the human person, which is God-given? In each of these, when you are against someone, when I'm reading these things on the graffiti, when we're singling out people for who or what they are, it shatters the image that is divine from my perspective. And in that, then for those who are morally minded, there is sin. Nostra Aetate, 50 years, has opened up a great panorama of learning and of mutual appreciation. However, fundamentalism, wherever it is, in any of these communities, is a problem. Perhaps the genesis of that problem is fear. How then do we not only condemn anti-Semitism and these persecutions, but how do we educate people who are of the thinking that this is a dangerous time for them? In our generation, in our time of Google, of internet, of technology that puts us in touch with the world in an instant, we are still facing the primitive behavior of hatred because of national, religious, or ethnic background. There's something profoundly sinful in that.
Thank you, Monsignor. Our next panelist, Laurie Regan. Laurie is a senior counsel in the capital markets practice of an international law firm in New York City. Ms. Regan is also the president of the New York chapter of the Endowment for Middle East Truth and serves on the board of Scholars for Peace in the Middle East. Please welcome Laurie Regan. Laurie, you have the floor.
Thank you, Lori, and thank you all for coming out today for this very important forum. If someone had suggested to me a decade ago that I would be sitting in a conference room in the United Nations discussing the rise of global anti-Semitism, I would have thought them crazy. Yes, this millennial-old hatred has seemingly existed since the beginning of time, but as historian Richard Landis discussed in a recent essay, the years from 1945 to 2000 in the West represent the longest sustained period of principled and open philo-Judaism, what I would transcribe as Christian support for Israel's independence and Zionism in the 3 millennia-long history of Israelite Jewish civilization. Landis specifically dates the onset of the current wave of anti-Semitism to the early days of October 2000, when France and other European countries saw sharp rises in a range of hostile acts towards Jews. Noted author, scholar, and psychologist Dr. Phyllis Chesler authored a book entitled The New Anti-Semitism in 2003 that was mostly ignored at the time. Her very prescient thesis that the anti-Zionism taking hold across the globe was just a cover for what in reality was actually good old-fashioned anti-Semitism is now a generally accepted reality that cannot be ignored. And Professor Landis stated, Jew hatred has taken many forms over its millennia-long history, constantly adapting to new conditions, mutating to best disseminate its memes. Under the conditions of modernity, after the Holocaust UN Geneva Convention, where open hatred of all Jews is stifled by political correctness, anti-Zionism offers the most successful mutation. Anti-Zionist memes can fly where anti-Semitic ones are prohibited, and then bring them along. I was slower to wake up to the rampant anti-Semitism flaring across the world. But when Israel's Operation Cast Lead became the impetus for violent and ugly demonstrations, it was impossible to ignore. In France, Britain, Norway, Greece, Malaysia, Sweden, Bosnia, Lebanon, Thailand, South Korea, and India, the hate manifested itself in hysteria. The United States was not immune, as videos of demonstrators screaming "Death to Israel," "God bless Hitler," "Kill the Jews," and "Reopen the ovens" could be heard on the streets of New York, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., and Fort Lauderdale. Last summer's ugliness escalated beyond my wildest expectations as anti-Semitic demonstrations were once again held across the world in response to another Israeli defensive war with the terrorist organization Hamas. Sitting in my Midtown Manhattan office almost 40 floors up, I was astounded to hear loud chants from the river to the sea, "Palestine will be free." Operation Protective Edge was yet another excuse for anti-Semites to take advantage of their First Amendment rights and call for violence and hatred of Jews. In the United States, demonstrations once again occurred with violence becoming commonplace. In San Francisco, we heard calls of "Long live the Intifada," "We support the Intifada." In Los Angeles, there were violent attacks on pro-Israeli demonstrators. In Seattle, signs were brandished proclaiming "Zionist Israel equals Nazi Germany." Palestine screams terror, Israel screams greed. AIPAC supports the murder of children, and one poster depicted a Jew eating a Gentile child with a cup of blood on the side. The anti-Semitic canards are sadly alive and well on the streets of the United States. In Europe, where a record high 543 anti-Semitic incidents occurred in July and August of 2014, leading to the UK's David Cameron calling anti-Semitism one of the greatest evils of humanity, we were reminded that the hatred that led to the Holocaust is once again rearing its ugly head. The violence took hold in Paris, Casablanca, Minsk, Mumbai, Istanbul, Frankfurt, London, Brussels, and other cities across the globe where Jews are fleeing en masse as chants of "You Jews are beasts." Israeli flags are burned, and yes, Jews were murdered while visiting a Jewish museum in Brussels and shopping for Shabbat dinner at a kosher butcher shop in Paris. In France, where Jews represent 1% of the population, 50% of all racist crimes are motivated by anti-Semitism. In the United States, FBI hate crime statistics bear out the harsh reality that attacks against Jews far outweigh any other religious group. In response to the violence that left hundreds of Jews besieged inside a synagogue in Paris, one reporter stated, quote, "What I have seen today is Arab hatred against Jews, pure hatred, right in the middle of Paris. Don't try to explain or understand. It was hatred, period." Which brings me to my next point. Islam is the religion with the highest percentage of open hostility to Jews and anti-Semitic attitudes, as well as Holocaust denial. And before people rush to call me an Islamophobe, I suggest that we must recognize this phenomenon and question what we can do to stem the tide of this raging aggression. And it is important to note that Muslim hatred of Jews has absolutely nothing to do with the existence of Israel and its conflict with the Palestinians, and that any suggestion of that is based in either ignorance or anti-Semitism itself. Arab Muslim attacks against Jews from the beginning of the 20th century, well before any alleged occupation of disputed lands, have been well documented. And if Israel did disappear into the sea, as far too many of this earth's inhabitants seem to wish, anti-Semitic canards, such as Jews are warmongers, greedy Jews control the world, and other such nonsense, would continue to flourish. As the brilliant scholar Ruth Wise recently wrote, "If we mistakenly imagine that this is about the Jews, we fall into the trap that anti-Semitism sets for us by deflecting attention from perpetrators to victims. The trail of terror leads not to the Jews, but from those who organize against them. opposition to Israel was the unifying feature of an otherwise splintering Arab League that found in anti-Zionism the same ideological energy that Europeans had found in anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism has also reared its ugly head in far too many institutional aspects of civil society. The media, academia, and even governments are quickly mainstreaming what was once taboo. Lethal journalism has led to the creation of groups that are specifically designed to fight these falsehoods. Palestinian lethal narratives about Israeli atrocities such as the Al-Dura murder, the Jenin massacre, the Gaza open-air prison, and Israel's deliberate targeting of civilians are accepted as truth without any real investigation simply because of an inherent bias against the Jewish state. While the IDF was forced to establish a media desk just to counter the lies and false narratives emanating from anti-Semitic bias that portrays Israel as the Goliath unnecessarily attacking the weaker Davids in the neighborhood, groups like Honest Reporting and Camera were established that, while calling out falsehoods in the BBC, CNN, and New York Times, find themselves in an uphill battle of bombardment with no end in sight. The media is helped along by NGOs that proliferate lies against Israel at an unseemly rate. B'Tselem defends its Holocaust-denying researcher, and Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch only focus their faux studies on Israel rather than the human rights-abusing dictatorships. The UN's own UNRWA is one of the worst culprits, allowing Hamas terrorists to hide rockets in UNRWA schools in Gaza and publishing books that teach Arabs to hate Jews, furthering the burgeoning animus in the region that is actually helping prevent any possibility of peace. College campuses are hotbeds of anti-Semitism, as boycott, divestment, and sanctions measures are voted upon by both student governments and national faculty organizations, and are met with either silence or consent by college administrations. Earlier this year, Larry Summers recognized that the general failure of American academic leaders to aggressively take on the challenge posed by the BDS movement represents a consequential abdication of moral responsibility. He also added, "It is a sad irony that Theodor Herzl, the founder of modern Zionism, hoped that the establishment of the State of Israel would bring an end to anti-Semitism. On college campuses in the United States, vilification of Israel has never been so great." And yet, from NYU and Harvard to the University of Michigan and UC Berkeley, it is not uncommon for Jewish students to receive death threats or faux eviction notices while administrators remain silent. The Muslim Students Association, a Muslim Brotherhood offshoot, and Students for Justice in Palestine, a group known for its violence, aggressive tactics, and intimidation of Jewish students, are opening chapters on campuses across the country. Swastikas are becoming commonplace on Jewish fraternity houses, and AEPI students from across the country met recently to share their accounts of violent acts taken against them, including one that left a young man hospitalized for at least 3 weeks. The BDS movement is showing no signs of waning. Rather, it seems to be flourishing as anti-Semites the world over use Israel as their new punching bag, disguising their hatred of Jews as a politically correct fight against Israeli apartheid. The veil is lifted as soon as one questions why the focus is on Israel, rather than the true regimes across the Middle East and beyond, which are vile and anti-Semitic, and which are ignored. But those states are not inhabited by Jews. One final thought before I conclude. It is unacceptable for any government to encourage anti-Semitism with calls of violence and dissemination of hate. But when anti-Semitic memes are propagated by the President of the United States and his cabinet members and staffers, Jews the world over must activate to defend themselves against what could very well prove to be a coming tidal wave of aggression. As Barack Obama's full-court press to force Congress to approve his agreement with Iran moves from demonizing Republicans to demonizing Jews who fear with good reason that they are witnessing the signing of another Munich agreement, all people of good conscience must speak out that anti-Semitism is simply not acceptable discourse, no matter who is speaking. Tropes of Jews leading the world into war, of dual loyalty and the like, have always been and always will be pure and simple, ugly anti-Semitism. And that poses a danger not just for American Jews and Israeli Jews on the front lines, but of the entire world. For when Israel goes, so too does the rest of the Western world. This cancer, known as anti-Semitism, begins with the Jews, but as history has proven, it does not end there. It infiltrates all of society, and it is coming our way. Shouts of death to Israel are invariably followed by shouts of death to America. While my office may sit 40 stories up in the clouds, anti-Semitism had no trouble reaching me last summer. It is my hope that world leaders and the citizens across the civilized Western world come down from the clouds to help stop this psychosis before it spreads too far and wide to contain. Those who fail to heed the lessons of history are doomed to repeat its tragedies, and history is repeating itself while far too many are ignoring it. History will not look kindly upon the Western world in the early 21st century if we allow this cancer to grow. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Regan. Now I would like to introduce you to our next panelist, Sammy Eppel. He is a consultant and political analyst, journalist, member of Inter-American Press Association, columnist for Venezuelan major newspaper El Universal, over 600 published articles reprinted in other newspapers and websites, guest commentator in radio and television in Venezuela and abroad. Since 2004, Sammy has concentrated on the Venezuelan phenomenon, government-sponsored anti-Semitism, and how it relates to Judeophobia. Please welcome Mr. Eppel.
Thank you, Laurie. Radical takeover of Christian communities in Latin America. 100 years ago, the Christian population of the Middle East was 26%. Today is approximately 2%. What happened to those millions of Christians? They now constitute a diaspora that spans the world. It probably started as a trickle in the 19th century, and then there were events that created spikes. One was probably the Armenian genocide that took place in Turkey during World War I. It stands to reason that Christian communities in other Middle Eastern countries that were under the domination of the Ottoman Empire emigrated when news surfaced of the slaughter of the Christian brothers. In my part of the world, Latin America, there are close to 25 million Christians of Arab descent. In Brazil, there are more Christians of Lebanese ancestry than there are actual people in the whole country of Lebanon. Because they were Christians, they integrated with the native population of the same faith. They are generally well-educated, hardworking, so they prospered and became a welcome addition to those societies. So far, so good. One community stands out: the Christian Palestinians in Chile. Most came from Bethlehem and Beit Jala and started arriving around 1850. By 1920, there were 100,000 strong, with well-established institutions, churches, social clubs, and even a Premier League football team. By 1948, there were 200,000. By 1967, there were 300,000. And now, there are over 400,000. In spite of representing only 2% of the Chilean general population, they manage over 10% of the overall economy and are overrepresented in most civil society institutions. There's no need to overstate that they have done well for themselves and are a definite plus to the country of Chile. They now quadruple the Christians in the West Bank and Gaza, which are 53,000. They could easily be a prime good example of successful immigration and integration. It is obvious from the above timeline that their exile was never caused by Jews or even the State of Israel. Never. That makes it all the more remarkable the militant and anti-Israeli and sometimes anti-Semitic attitude and actions of the public figures that represent the community. Just give you a couple of examples. They are now financing a study with archaeologists, historians, trying to prove 11,000 years of Palestinian history. Well, 11,000 years ago was the Paleolithic era. They were only cave people. But they're financing this. They have plenty of money. Also, a month ago, the Palestinian ambassador to Chile, speaking to a mainly Palestinian Christian group, stated that the Jewish people never existed. Everybody cheered. I mean, this is incredible. I mean, if a Christian group cheers that the Jewish people never existed, they're actually negating their own Christianity. Maybe somebody should go and explain this to these people. Now, with ample funding, because it's a very prosperous community, like I said, they have 10%, they manage 10% of the Chilean economy. They're hugely successful. They have become the prime providers of anti-Israel and anti-Semitic professional-grade media content in Spanish for much of the continent. We receive that all the time. Now, how did that happen? The answer is institutional takeover by the radical element. This was obviously well orchestrated over many years. This model, institutional takeover, is being copied in other Arab Christian communities in Latin America. Another example is the 1.6 million strong Arab Christian community in Venezuela, my country. They came mainly from Lebanon and Syria, also wealthy and well integrated. Now, their umbrella organization called FEARAB was taken over by a group led by Adel al-Sabayar, a rabid anti-Semite. He now presides over all Arab institutions in the country. He's a government official, being a member of the National Assembly. He actually traveled to Syria to fight alongside Hezbollah and was photographed in military fatigues and holding an AK-47. When he came back to Venezuela, he was hailed as a hero. I am sure that most of those 25 million Christians of Arab ancestry in Latin America are not anti-Semitic. But when their institutional agenda becomes radicalized, the rest, which is funding, discourse, and teachings, will inevitably follow. Now, the answer to that situation is religion. Talking about Christian religion. So far, the religious leadership has refused to get involved. And therefore, the message of Nostra Aetate has become lost by being ignored. Anti-Semitism is a social disease that, if not stopped, it will eventually infect humanity. The message should be clear. Anti-Semitism is not a Jewish problem. It's a human rights problem, and as such, it should be confronted. Now, the church, mainly the Catholic Church, which is the main religious group in Latin America. Most Latin American countries are Catholic countries. The church has to be more militant. They are simply trying to be politically correct. That is wrong. Religion has to be about principles and has to answer to ethical and moral values, even if it means going against politics. Thank you.
Thank you, Sammy. Our next panelist, I would like to introduce you to Rabbi Dr. Analia Bortz. Analia is Senior Rabbinic Fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, graduated in 2007. She is the first Latin American female rabbi who completed her rabbinical ordination in Jerusalem as a student of the Seminario Rabbinico Latino Americano Marshall T. Meyer. As a medical doctor, Dr. Bortz has served in different hospital and private clinics in Buenos Aires, Argentina, Jerusalem, Israel, Chile, and she now resides in Atlanta, Georgia. She also serves as advisor and board member of many philanthropic, medical, and historical literature organizations. Please welcome Rabbi Bortz.
Ignorance breeds fear. Fear breeds prejudice. Prejudice breeds hatred. And hatred breeds violence. Ignorance, fear, prejudice, hatred, violence. The history of anti-Semitism is rooted in this premise. We Jews have been carrying the weight of this foundation for over 2,000 years. From the fathers of the church, with Bishop Apollinaris of Hierapolis, who wrote a very polemic statement against the Jews in approximately the year 175 of the Common Era, the first anti-Jewish polemic in Latin called Adversus Judaeus, that dates from the year 200 of the Common Era and was written by Tertullian. We have plenty of books. Was the anti-Semitic view of the fathers of the church rooted in racism? At the end of the day, Jesus was born, lived, and died as a Jew. So was it a persecution of a race? The contra Judaeus, against the Jews, in that tradition is dispute with Judaism as a religion in some way, that the church fathers disputed also pagans and Manichaeans and Donatists and other heretics. That the early Christian anti-Jewish polemic did the intellectual and spade work for later persecution of the Jews is undeniable, but at its heart, the first centuries of Jewish-Christian relations were based on intellectual and theological dispute among people who sprang from the same religious soil. Nevertheless, the interpretation of this side sprouted as a convoluted understanding of future occurrences. Medieval blood libel, accusations, the Crusades, expulsions from England in 1290, from Spain in 1492, the Spanish Inquisition, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, Mein Kampf, the Shoah, the World War II genocide, France, the AMIA bombing in Buenos Aires are just an illustration of many more anti-Semitic attacks. This forum, ladies and gentlemen, is shared by you and us because there is a new motivation and presents us with a unique opportunity. Dialogue and understanding turns down prejudices and fears. Freedom of speech invites us to reflect and respect each other's opinion. I personally don't like to craft the word tolerance. No human being wants to be tolerated. I insist on the premise of mutual respect. I learned from the sages of our traditions in the Pirkei Avot, in the Ethics of the Fathers, when Hillel taught, if I'm not for myself, who am I? Im ein ani li mili. If I'm only for myself, what am I? כשאני רק לעצמי מה אני? If not now, when? ואם לא עכשיו, אימתי? We live in the 21st century. We are recipients of a masterpiece called Nostra Aetate, a declaration of the relations of the Church with non-Christian religions in the Second Vatican world, which on October 28, 1965, introduced a new concept of reconciliation between Jews and Christians. We call it in Hebrew an opportunity to teshuvah, the opportunity of redemption. And the time has come. For the last 50 years, the time of mutual reconciliation, of relational ties and spiritual growth has come. Pope Francis represents a breath of fresh air in the Judeo-Christian relationship. And he's also from Argentina, which is a great plus. My Latino roots bring me to Don Quixote de la Mancha, a man who refuses to give up on his principles. I have lived in my childhood and early adolescence years through the junta, the military government in my place of birth in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. I have lived the Israeli embassy bombing on March 17, 1992, in the core of my city in Buenos Aires. I have witnessed and served as the morgue examiner during the AMIA, the Jewish Federation bombing in the center of my beautiful Buenos Aires on July 18, 1994, where my husband and I lost friends and students. And as my husband was bringing these family members to the morgue, I needed to introduce them to what was left of an act of anti-Semitism. We decided to leave Argentina not because we felt unsafe, but because we knew that justice will never prevail. And unfortunately, 21 years later, we were proved right. The words of the book of Deuteronomy that seeks justice, justice you shall pursue, tzedek, tzedek tirdof, did not awake the Argentinian government. Resilience is our Jewish name. This resilience swerves from hatred and vengeance to communication and mutual understanding. We Jews are masters of looking at things from a different lens, from a positive angle, when prospects look gloomy. You can call it idealistic distortion or a prophetic fantasy, but the truth of the matter is that we Jews do not give up easily. We fight for what is right. We claim for justice and truth, even when we have been persecuted through history and mistreated. Dostoevsky said it right. The primary cause of Jewish existence is not the instinct of survival alone, but a driving and motivating idea, something universal and profound, and it is possible that mankind is not capable of understanding this cause. In each one of us resides the responsibility to teach how much we can construct instead of destruct. At the end of the day, we are all humans in the eyes of God, and we should reflect our humanity in the eyes of the other. Just look around. We all look different. Some of us are brunette, blonde, dark skin, bald. We are just made in the image of God. Just look at the others and find that divine spark. Our cry for survival unleashes a need for survival, and that has kept alive the Jewish people and well. Unfortunately, throughout history, hatred and bigotry has been based on ignorance. Once again, ignorance breeds fear, fear breeds prejudice, prejudice breeds hate, and hate breeds violence. In 1961, when men started exploring the space, Chekhov said, a white man can orbit the Earth, but a black one cannot enter a regular restroom. 54 years later, we are still so preoccupied with finding details on Mars while oblivious to the cries of our neighbors. So no more justifications, no more apologies should be expected from us, the Jewish people. We have our right to exist. We are not better than anybody else. There's no superior race. Eugenics is not part of our vocabulary. Superior race don't exist. We all have the responsibility to better this world. Just as we wish to know God's mercy, so we should show mercy to each other and to ourselves. Only 3 weeks ago, we celebrated 46 years of humans touching the moon. We have been so devoted to look beyond space that we forgot to look at the divine spark inside our human souls. Let's strive to look inside the eyes of the other and find that divine spark in each one of us, choosing right over wrong, and who knows, maybe that one small step of a man could be a giant leap for man or womankind. Today we carry a responsibility, each one of us, this honorable forum, and you as honorable guests. The responsibility of being ambassadors of mutual understanding, of mutual respect, of bettering this world. We have to defeat ignorance, fear, prejudice, so we can prevent violence. We have to start at our kitchen table, at our own families, indoor homes, in schools, on the streets, through social media, and our wings should spread globally. So let me conclude with the famous Talmudic story. The Talmud is the core basics of the Jewish people, filled with disputes between rabbis that talk a lot, but accomplish a lot as well. For many years, the disputes between two schools of thoughts, between two prominent rabbis, Hillel and Shammai, have been escalated. Hillel's school usually won the argument regarding the outcome of Jewish law. So one time the disciples of Shammai decided to test the disciples of Hillel. They took a butterfly and placed it in one's pupil's hand. They wanted to surprise Rabbi Hillel by asking this conundrum. Rabbi Hillel, they will ask, the butterfly that we have in our hands is alive or is dead? The disciples said, if Hillel says that the butterfly is dead, we will just open our hands and our butterfly will fly away. If Hillel will say the butterfly is alive, we will just squeeze our hand and will show Hillel that the butterfly is dead. So they knocked the door of Rabbi Hillel, and these disciples of Shammai said, Rabbi, the butterfly that we have in our hands is alive or is dead? And Rabbi Hillel, that was a pursuer of peace and mutual understanding, looked at them, smiled, and said, the answer is in your hands. Members of this forum, the Jewish people and the state of Israel are here today not just to stay, but to flourish, helping others to improve their life standards. Like we, Jews and Israelis, have done during catastrophes in Haiti, in Africa, in Nepal, in Indonesia, being the first ones to assist the other, the one who is in need, regardless of race and religion. We continue to do it in time of war, as Israel does quietly with Iraqi and Syrian refugees, bringing them to receive free attendance and medical care in the state of Israel every single day when they are fleeing from their countries of origin. We do this also in times of peace, in time of growth, and in time of disaster, because we need each other. As you probably remember, a prominent Protestant pastor, Martin Niemöller, said it perhaps not like anybody else. In this world in which we are all depending on each other, we need each other. So he said, first they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came from the socialists, and I did not speak up because I was not a socialist. Then they came from the trade unionists, and I did not speak up because I was not one of them. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak up for me. We have many answers in our hands. You, as representatives of the United Nations, you have a responsibility to teach the world that anti-Semitism is a never again statement. And never again truly means never again. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Our closing panelist, Dr. Alex Grobman. Dr. Grobman is a historian with a master's and PhD in contemporary Jewish history from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He is also known for being author, editor, and writer for many publications. Dr. Grobman established the first Holocaust Center in the U.S. under the auspices of a Jewish federation in St. Louis, Missouri. He served as its director and currently serves at the Los Angeles, California Center. He is currently working on a book about the media bias towards Israel. Dr. Grobman, thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Lori. Since the 3rd century BCE, when the Hellenists first advanced the case against the Jewish people, an underlying animosity toward Jews has stayed basically constant, no matter what the grievance. Pagans dislike Jews for being aloof, for refusing to worship their gods, for their practice of marital exclusivity, dietary restrictions, and missionizing. Christians accuse them of killing Jesus. Enlightenment theorists condemn them for Christianity. Populists who supported the right of the people to fight against the privileged elite blame them for modernity. And Islamists depicted and continue to depict them as being in the vanguard of Western ideas and values. During the medieval period, Jews were blamed for causing the Black Death by poisoning Europe's wells. They were accused of engaging in black magic, witchcraft, profanation of the name of the host, of scheming to destroy Christendom. and of committing ritual murder in order to obtain the blood of non-Jews for the use in religious rituals. This latter accusation became so common that it earned a name of its own, the blood libel. In the 19th century, the blood libels reached, quote, academic proportions and occasionally led to outbreaks of violence throughout Europe. They continued to endure primarily in the backward areas of Eastern Europe and the Russian Empire, and the Russian government exploited this myth to incite pogroms, but the accusations eventually lost their potency, especially in secular urban areas. In rural regions, the legend persisted through the encouragement of the Catholic Church, whose local priests continued to attest to their veracity throughout the 19th century and well into the 20th century. Blood libel led Christians to view the Jew as, quote, the harbinger of evil. The blood libel and the medieval myth of Achashverosh, the wandering Jew, represented to them the curse that Jesus had placed on the Jewish people. The legendary Achashverosh was said to have rushed Jesus to his crucifixion while denying him consolation or refuge, for which he was cursed to wander the rest of his life without a place to live, loathed and disowned. In Christian folklore, Jewish presence portends horror and emptiness. The myth of the, quote, wicked Jew became emblematic of the condemned destiny of Jews were supposed to inflict on themselves and all they encountered. The Jew is the eternal, rootless foreigner who never finds his home or develops roots anywhere. The protocols of the elders of Zion became known as the Jewish blueprint for world domination. There were numerous versions about the origins of the protocols. The most popular theory was that the protocols were adopted at the first Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland in 1897. The ostensible purpose of the Congress was to discuss the creation of the Zionist movement, but that was only a ruse to plan a worldwide Jewish conspiracy. The Russians, the French, and the Vatican also expressed their concerns about this Congress. A secret manuscript was fabricated between 1898 and 1903 by Russian anti-Semites working in Paris for the Tsarist secret police, who were instructed to identify the Jews as the source of an insidious plot to oust the Russian monarchy. The manuscript they produced became known as the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, an alleged summary of the secret meeting of the heads of the Jewish organization scheming to establish a Jewish world state on the remains of, quote, Gentile civilization. Thus, the discontent within Russian society could be explained as having been provoked by Jews rather than by anger and resentment directed at Tsarist tyranny and inept Russian bureaucracy. In this eternal conspiracy to control the world, Jews will use any nefarious methods necessary to achieve their objectives. Communism and capitalism were said to have been created as a means to manipulate the world and dominate its people. Jews were accused of infiltrating modern society and using their skills to direct the government, the stock exchange, the press, the theater, and literature. Jews took control of imperialist countries. In other words, Jews are behind every nefarious act, including colonialism. And the protocols provided convincing explanations for societal problems at a time of industrialization, confusing social change, and general upheaval in the same way they had been used in the past to account for plagues and natural catastrophes. Hitler used the protocols to explain his theory of how Marxism had created a weapon by which international Jewish financiers could manipulate the world. Henry Ford used the International Jewish Series in the Dearborn Independent to reach millions of Americans, especially from those in rural areas who knew little of Jews except through rumor or religious studies. and were exposed to the protocol's myths about a worldwide Jewish conspiracy. The idea of Jewish 9/11 conspiracies and other theories about Jewish attempts to control the world have generated an entire cottage industry of books, pamphlets, videotapes, websites, and, quote, expert speakers on this subject. The charge that the Jews were behind 9/11 revived in modern form the classic old lies about Jewish pursuit of world domination. In a very real sense, the protocols have offered concrete proof that those who fear and hate Jews, and now the state of Israel, are truly justified. In this environment, John Mersheimer, who was a professor of political science at the University of Chicago, and Stephen Walt at Harvard, began to examine the Israel lobby and its alleged profound influence on the United States foreign policy and the contentious issue of dual loyalty, an issue that we're dealing with today, thanks to our president. Alan Dershowitz observed that since Mersheimer and Walt are mainstream American academics, it gives their thesis added authority and credibility in the academic and general community. The protocols have been exposed by historians, journalists, politicians, police, and religious leaders. Yet the protocols continue to be published in practically every language in hundreds of editions, in hundreds of millions of copies, and in very compelling videos on the internet. The potential damage and danger of the protocols in shaping public opinion should not ever be underestimated. When Jews are portrayed as manipulators who seek power over other people's lives, they come to be perceived as a dire threat. It is therefore particularly disconcerting that this false and harmful perception of Jews is embraced even today by leaders of the Arab Muslim world, where the protocols are published in vast quantities and cited in the writings of mainstream academics, not the crazies, in mainstream academics who lend credibility and legitimacy to this utter falsehood. And the Hamas covenant, Article 22 states, with their money they took control of the world media, news agencies, the press, publishing houses, broadcasting stations, and others. And it goes on. In London, Paris, Berlin, Barcelona, Caracas, and other Western cities today, as we heard, protesters carry signs with anti-Jewish slogans. Hitler was right. Be prepared for the real Holocaust. Cleanse the earth from dirty Zionists. Israel is the anti-Semite. Or the cancer of the Middle East, Israel must not exist. Anti-Semitism and anti-Israel attitudes on campus are closely linked to disparaging attitudes to America, opposition to free market capitalism, and distrust of business. In other words, if anyone thinks for a moment that this is just an issue alone, they are really, their head is in the sand. These people hate America. They oppose free markets, capitalism, and business. Not that there's some reason not to distrust business at times, but we believe in capitalism. Israel is seen as an extension of Western neocolonialism, and Jews as the embodiment of the oppressive power elite. But anti-Semitism has long been seen by Jews as a harbinger of profound problems and a clear indication of fissures within society. The loathing that originates with Jews does not cease with them. Eric Hoffer, a former longshoreman and non-Jewish American social philosopher, recognized the double standard and hypocrisy in the way Jews were being portrayed and treated when he observed, "The Jews are a peculiar people. Things permitted to other nations are forbidden to the Jews. Other nations, when victorious on the battlefield, dictate peace terms. But when Israel is victorious, it must pursue peace. Everyone expects the Jew to be the only Christians in the world. Other nations, when they are defeated, survive and recover. But should Israel be defeated, it would be destroyed. Hofer understood the importance of the Jews as the harbinger of what happens when evil reigns unchallenged. Jews are in the forefront in the war to preserve our liberal democracy, our freedoms, and our way of life. Failure to respond to assaults encourages even more attempts to destroy not only Jews, but Western culture and civilization. I have a premonition, he concluded, that will not leave me. As it goes with Israel, so it will go with all of us. Should Israel perish, the Holocaust will be upon us. Thank you.
The goal of this forum has been to promote an environment that prevents the negative seeds of anti-Semitism from flourishing using a common vehicle, faith and education. Recalibrating both minds and hearts must start at the earliest possible moment, in homes, schools, workplaces, and governments. We must all seek and implement sustainable ideas and solutions to confront this worldwide movement. As governmental and religious leaders, we must focus on learning the lessons from successes and failures, of identifying the many facets of this scourge and how we, as Christians and people of conscience, can develop best practices at the UN and in our respective countries to address this ancient threat to our Jewish brethren and all people of faith. Nostra Aetate is a vital step in the right direction to stem the age-old hatred. Our Christian faith dictates that we care about our Jewish brethren, and logic and preservations motivate us to speak out. So I want to recommend some action steps that you can take. First, adopt the U.S. State Department's definition of anti-Semitism within the United Nations and in your own parliaments. You have a copy in your documents before you, and it states, anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. Second, based upon this definition, draft a proclamation and or legislation on behalf of your country to introduce legislation that would protect your Jewish communities from any form of anti-Semitic attacks. Also, draft a proclamation or legislation to formally condemn the protocols of the Elders of Zion. The protocols are much more than a symbol of anti-Semitism of the last 100 years that mushroomed into the Holocaust. It is a vessel that holds the most vicious and poisonous lies against an entire people. And even today, many anti-Semites repeat and act on them. Over the last 54 years, we've seen a dramatic theological shift in the Catholic Church as 4 popes have come out to condemn the Church's anti-Semitism, including Pope John the 23rd, Pope John the 6th, Pope Paul II, and most recently, Pope Francis, as he stated, "I've said it other times, and I would like to repeat it now. It's a contradiction that a Christian is anti-Semitic. His roots are Jewish. A Christian cannot be anti-Semitic. Let anti-Semitism be banished from the heart and life of every man and every woman." He further stated, "You ask me what to say to our Jewish brothers about the promise God made to them. Has this been forgotten? And this, believe me, is a question that radically involves us as Christians because, with the help of God, we have discovered that the Jewish people are still the holy root from which Jesus originated. Through the terrible experience of the Shoah, through the terrible trials of these past centuries, the Jews have kept their faith in God, and for this, we will never be grateful enough to them as the Church and as humanity at large." I want to close with the story of Queen Esther. as she was confronted with the life and death situation. Queen Esther married an anti-Semitic king in Persia who signed a decree to kill all the Jews in his province at the request of Haman. The king didn't know his beloved wife was a Jew, but Haman was offered 10,000 talents of silver to destroy the Jews. Are we witnessing similarities today in the recent deal with Iran? The edict Esther faced was that no one, not even his wife, under decree of death, could approach the king unless summoned. When she sent word back to her uncle of her predicament, he responded with these words: "Do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" As I stated earlier, we each have our own area of influence and power. Each and every one of us has the power to do something. The question is, will we use it to stop the hatred? Will we do all in our power to stand up and make a difference? Each of you have been brought into this world for such a time as this. The question is, will you remain silent? God bless you, and thank you for attending our forum.